Dear friends from Australia, we would like to welcome you to Apex-Brasil's investment promotion events. Australia is an important partner to Brazil, with accumulated investments in the country of over $3.3 billion, meaning that the country is the top destination of Australian investments in Latin America. Australia has also made major investments in renewable energy, logistics, online services, manufacturing, agribusiness, financial services, insurance, and fashion retail in Brazil. Important Australian companies such as Macquarie, Goodman, Brambles, SICK, Carsales, Cotton On, Nufarm, Caroon, Ansell, Amcor, and Pacific Hydro. But there is a space for more. It is important to take into account that to be a truly global company, it is necessary to be present in a market as large as the Brazilian. Therefore, it is time for Australian companies to make a more detailed assessment of investment opportunities in Brazil in the different sectors. Our doors are open to facilitate your investments in Brazil. Invest with trust and safety. Invest with Apex-Brasil. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Invest in Brasil Infrastructure Sanitation Edition, held by the Trade and Investment Promotion Agency Apex-Brasil in partnership with the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Regional Development, and Economy, the Brazilian Development Bank, Caixa Econômica, Investment Partnerships Program, the Brazilian Association of Infrastructure and Basic Industries, ABGIB, Foreign Trade Chamber, AEGIA, BRK, and our partners of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce. I am Roberto Scotto, Investment Manager of Apex-Brasil, and I'm going to be the presenter of this event. This is the third chapter of a series of digital events on infrastructure that will be held this year. The next ones will be focused on other markets and sectors, specifically Turkey and ports. The purpose of this event is to present the advances made in Brazilian legislation with the new legal framework of sanitation, in addition to detailing the opportunities that are open to private capital in the country. The event will be held completely in English. To achieve this goal, in today's event, we'll have the participation of key people, such as the Minister of Regional Development, Rogério Marinho, the Executive Secretary of the Foreign Trade Chamber, Carlos Pio, the PPI Deputy Special Secretary, Bruno Westing, the Development Bank Infrastructure Director, Fábio Abraão, the Caixa Econômica National Manager, André Araújo, the Ambassador of Canada to Brazil, Jennifer May, and the Ambassador of Brazil to Canada, Pedro Borio, among others from the public and private sector. There will not have a Q&A session, so if you want more specific information or to schedule bilateral meetings with us, please send your requests to the email ibi@apexbrasil.com.br that is appearing now on the screen. Now, for the opening words, I invite the President of Apex-Brasil, Sérgio Segovia. Welcome, Sérgio.
Thank you, Roberto. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in this event promoted by Apex-Brasil. I greet everyone present with a warm welcome to the Minister of Regional Development, Mr. Rogério Marinho, who is a key figure in the sanitation sector and its development in Brazil, the Director of Infrastructure, Concessions, and public and private partnership of the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES, Mr. Fábio Abraão, who works directly in the modeling of projects offered to the private sector, and the Executive Director of Foreign Trade Chamber, CAMEX, Mr. Carlos Pio, representing the Ministry of Economy. I'd also like to welcome the Ambassador of Canada to Brazil, Mrs. Jennifer May, and the Ambassador of Brazil to Canada, Mr. Pedro Borio. It's an honor to open the 3rd edition of the Invest in Brazil Infrastructure. The first 2 editions were a remarkable success along investors' audiences from 50 countries. Today, we will highlight the outstanding opportunities arising in the sanitation sector in Brazil. I'm proud to share the full commitment of the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, Apex-Brasil, for attracting foreign investments to our country. Despite the current global pandemic, the agency was directly responsible in 2020, from January to August, from facilitating $3.17 billion in investments in Brazil. Our mission is to increasingly encourage investors to discover the opportunities offered by Brazil, covering all their needs and offering support and accurate connections with public and private players, as well as quality and precise information. On July 15th, 2020, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro enacted the new regulatory framework for sanitation. One of the main expected results is the increase in opportunities for privatization and private investment in water and sanitation sectors. Unlike all other Brazilian infrastructure sectors, those were not yet fully open to private investment. The new framework sets the goal of universal coverage for sanitation services in Brazil by 2033. It comes amid the challenges that water and sanitation infrastructure imposes on the country. Today, almost 35 million Brazilians do not have access to drinking water, and over 100 million people in the country, about half of the country's population, do not have access to sanitation and sewage systems. The framework proposes to develop sanitation infrastructure and services across the country to provide almost 100% of all Brazilian households with water and sanitation services. The fulfillment of this goal until the year 2033 should demand investments ranging from 140 billion to 160 billion US dollars. The new regulation brings greater stability and legal certainty by promoting and safeguarding competition in the market, eliminating barriers to entry, and standardizing the rules that govern the sector. Brazil is huge in size, population, and investment opportunities, and it is essential to highlight some information about the country. Brazil returned to the list to the 25 most reliable countries for foreign direct investments, according to the Index of North American Consultancy, A.T. Kearney, released last June. Only 3 emerging markets are in this list: Brazil, China, and the United Arab Emirates. 2 factors mainly boosted this confidence in Brazil: the approval of the pension reform and the federal government efforts to expand privatizations and concessions. This recognition allows us to remain optimistic, even in face of the pandemic situation. Likewise, we are aware of the domestic scenario as well as the global context. UNCTAD and the OECD have forecast a reduction of up to 40% in this year's worldwide FDI. In Brazil, the central bank estimates a drop of 23.6%. However, we rely in history. The country has been much prominent than its crisis. Brazilian institutions have great resilience to face challenging periods. Certainly, these are difficult times, but the maintenance of international investment flows is fundamental for our economies. Developing countries, such as Brazil, offer strategic opportunities. To conclude my remarks, I'd like to mention that the new legal framework will significantly impact the Brazilian economy in the years following the COVID-19 crisis. In other words, private investors attending this event can certainly expect to benefit from substantial new opportunities in the water and sanitation sectors in the years to come. Keep in mind that Apex-Brasil is at your disposal for any need you may have for safely landing in the country. Try to access our newsletter with regulatory information on infrastructure, agribusiness, renewable energy, health, and other sectors, as well as cross-cutting changes. The publication is written in English and is available monthly on our website. Our doors are opened to facilitate your investments in Brazil. Invest with Apex-Brasil. Thank you very much.
The president of Apex stressed that the sanitation sector has the potential to attract $160 billion in investments. So it's a huge market with many, many opportunities. Thank you very much, Sergio. Now, we are going to connect to the Minister of Regional Development, Rogério Marinho, so that he can say his welcome words.
Bom, agradeço ao
such a qualified audience, people who have responsibility to define investment in their own countries. The Ministry of Regional Development is getting ready to present from first semester next year and next semester a robust portfolio of investment in basic sanitation because of the new framework on sanitation approved 45 days ago, and that allows private initiative to be partners with the Brazilian federal government in this challenge of universalization in water and sewage treatment for thousands of Brazilians, and we expect have high expectations. The beginning of the portfolios are already done. The 30th this month we'll have the major auction, the first phase in the state of Alagoas, north east state of Brazil, and B3 São Paulo, and we will be present. I believe the success of the first auction, because of the companies that wrote themselves in, will be an opening process that with a comfortable environment, legal safety for other investments to come. We are reformulating our whole portfolio to allow certification to launch green titles, so green bonds. Because of the next investments that we are developing, we intend that there should be still some time to go in the speed to build the structural projects, and thus we are proposing, we are suggesting the development of regional funds. We're talking about something around $1 billion that are already within these funds, but that in accountability are held in the National Treasury with low activity. We are sending in the next 45 days to National Congress when measure to structure these developments so they can fund the structuring of projects that technically should be qualified and should have sustainability to welcome to receive the investment in sanitation and infrastructure areas. In the various structures of our MDE, we have a backbone with our actions. We won't get away by our president's guidance, President Bolsonaro, from sustainable development and to integrate population to this growth program, development program in the country, mainly the economically unable or less able population, so we can have transparency in the application of the resources and environmental sustainability. That's why we have an agreement with CBI, one of the largest certifiers around the world, and in December we will have a work plan jointly done so that our whole portfolio in sanitation as well as in water resources, urban mobility, public lighting should have the possibility to be certified to launch green bonds. We have the notion that there's investors that are paying literally to provide resources in banks around the world, searching a safe port, a safe haven, a safe port to sustainable investments at long range. And we are ready to do our homework to be able to be the place where these resources will dock in or arrive. We have the responsibility of fund managers around the world and around the country to have investments in fields that should have this worry, with sustainability, with the environment, and because of that, this has been the tone of our performance, to have our whole portfolio of investments with these specifications to allow, as I mentioned before, comfort in these investments. I would like to greet here Apex for its initiative to allow that investors, the public agents, ambassadors, the ones in charge of businesses, the law firms, the structuring project firms should get to know about this, about the projects, the plans of each one of the ministries, the final activity, finalistic structures, the end activities, the structuring, environment, agriculture field. We are certainly one of the most dynamic and innovating countries in the world, and we place ourselves at your disposal to add, to clarify anything for the ones that should have interest to have more detail on our portfolio, as well as on the ways and needs that are placed so the investments can effectively be done. I thank you for the opportunity, and we place ourselves at your disposal as always.
These projects will show transparency and legal certainty because this sector has very good potential.
Okay, thank you. Obrigado.
To start the first panel that will address the new legal framework of sanitation, its guidelines, challenges, and universalization, we'll have the presence of the Deputy Superintendent at the National Water Agency, Carlos Mota, the Chief of Staff of the National Secretariat of Sanitation, André Galvão, and the coordinator of the Water and Sewage Committee of the Association of Infrastructure and Basic Industries, Daniel Keller. I'm pleased to invite the Executive Secretary of the Foreign Trade Chamber, Carlos Pio, who will be our moderator. Carlos Pio, are you with us?
Hello, I'm here. Thank you very much, Scotto, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be the moderator of such panels, such an important issue. I would like to start by saying that sanitation is an area that Brazil has lagged behind all countries in the same level of development. And the recent changes in the legal framework are here as an important victory of the whole Brazilian state to open up the sector for investments in the two levels of administration that deal with sewage and offering important opportunities for investors from around the world. I'm pleased to invite André Galvão, the Chief of Staff of the National Secretariat of Sanitation of the Ministry of Regional Development, to present us some of the important challenges that come with the approval of the new sanitation landmark. André, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Carlos. Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to say that it's a pleasure to be here with you, and I also would like to thank the audience for having me and the organization for inviting me to speak. Well, as said before, I am André Galvão, Head of Staff and Deputy National Secretary of Sanitation from the Ministry of Regional Development of Brazil. And I have spent more than a decade working on and studying about basic sanitation policies, not only in Brazil, but also in other countries. And hopefully, before I die, I'll have answered the question, what's the most efficient and best way to universalize basic sanitation? Today, we're going to see why the Brazilian case is truly unique and how the legislative change that took place recently in Brazil may bring about basic sanitation coverage expansion in the next 13 years. Well, just for contextual purposes, it is to be highlighted that the concept of basic sanitation in Brazil has nothing to do with, for instance, improved sanitation or any other terminology related to SDGs and so on. Basic sanitation is a Brazilian concept that comprises 4 different services: water supply, sanitation, solid waste management, and storm water management. This concept is one of a kind, and the new legal framework governs all these services. Well, so to understand where we are right now in Brazil, we must go back in time to see the heart of the problem. Brazil has tested only a few basic sanitation provision models throughout its history. After a period of no regulation at all and concentration of service provision in not many big cities in Brazil, the military government back in the 1960s put forward a plan called National Plan of Sanitation, which aimed at expanding drinking water supply coverage. Although this national plan had goals of expanding sanitation coverage as well, the government did put in a great deal of effort on providing urban areas with water supply. So in order to rapidly expand coverage, a set of coherent financial and institutional strategies was designed. From my point of view, the most important one, well, certainly not the best, but surely the most important one, it was an institutional strategy that has long-term impacts. That was establishment of large public companies that were created to manage water supply and sanitation services throughout the territory of Brazilian states. Each Brazilian state had one water supply and sanitation company. to the 1980s, the policy produced good, positive results related to coverage expansion. However, since then, this institutional setting has been unable to keep increasing the share of Brazilian people who has access to those services. It's important to draw your attention to the fact that only water supply and sanitation services were included in the National Plan of Sanitation. Solid waste management and stormwater management services have always been provided by local governments, which means municipalities. So this sequence of facts and policies has brought us to a delicate catch-22 situation. On the one hand, we have a sector, especially with regard to water supply and sanitation, that became heavily dependent on public investment to expand its coverage. On the other hand, the current fiscal situation of local and state-level public entities effectively imposes a curb on new investment. Thus, we have more than 100 million people without access to sanitation services and about 35 million people with no access to drinking water services. Concerning solid waste destination, Brazil has more than 1,000 garbage dumps. So currently, public sector provides basic sanitation services to more than 90% of Brazilian population. We estimate Brazil needs about $150 billion to universalize basic sanitation. So we have a wide gap to bridge. So it is about time we licked our wounds. And the new basic sanitation legal framework is deeply rooted in solving our current problems. Therefore, the new law is based on 4 pillars. The first one is the setting of competitive process to get awarded basic sanitation contracts. The second one is the establishment of clear universalization goals. The third one is regionalization, and the fourth one is the improvement of regulation. On the subject of competition, our first pillar, the new law forbids no-bid contracts, which were allowed only for public providers. So from now on, every new contract must be a result of a public bidding process. This mechanism stimulates higher service levels that could be carried out by any efficient company, whether public or private. About the goals of universalization, the second pillar, the new law states that by the end of 2033, 99% of Brazilian population will have access to drinking water supply and 90% to sanitation services. Other themes are subject to mandatory goals like water losses reduction, sewage treatment level, and so on. Regarding regionalization, the third pillar, one of the main concerns during the period of the new law formulation was the problem of isolated, tiny municipalities, whose scale and affordability to pay could be lower than the required to achieve universalization goals during the horizon defined by the new law. Thus, ways of interfederative cooperation specifically related to basic sanitation were created. Besides, enforcement procedures to be performed even by the central government were established. About the fourth pillar, we will only quote the improvement of basic sanitation services regulation as long as my colleague, Carlos Mota, is going to deliver his presentation in a few minutes, and he will certainly discuss it. To conclude my speech, I would like to mention the outstanding collaborative work the federal government of Brazil is doing to formulate decrees so that the new legal framework could be quickly and successfully implemented. One decree has been published and 2 others are about to be. Within the process of the most important decree, a public hearing and a public consultation have been performed. Well, that's all for today, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, André Silveira, from the National Secretariat of Sanitation at the Ministry of Regional Development. I think it's very important in your talk that you put into a historical account of the evolution of our framework, and even the very concept of basic sanitation in Brazil, which seems to be something key for foreign investors to understand. It called my attention also the sheer number of people denied access to water and sanitation, around 35 million. So a huge market if we look into the water cup half filled. So we have a huge opportunity here, and let's forget about the past that has caused so many problems and so many difficulties to such people that are denied access to sanitation and water. It's also really important to understand the budget, the forecast for the budget that is needed to complete the universalization, $150 billion, something that will necessarily have to bring private investors and the awareness in different levels of government to such a necessity. And finally, I think it's very important the way you put the 4 pillars of the new law of sanitation: the bidding process, the clear universalization goals, the emphasis on regionalization, and the improvement in the quality of the regulatory framework. And finally, I think it's important that you finished with a key message of the intergovernment collaboration in order to have all these key goals improved immediately, and the decrees that have been launched. With no further ado, I would like to invite Carlos Mota, the Deputy Superintendent of the National Water Agency, ANA, to present us with his views on the new sanitation framework, perspectives, guideline, challenges of the universalization of sanitation in Brazil. Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you. I'd like to thank Apex for inviting us, having us from ANA, the National Water and Sanitation Agency, since the approval of this new law. And so here I'll talk about 3 topics. First, I'll talk about the situation of the regulation in Brazil before the approval of this new law. Then I'll talk about what has changed after that. And finally, what does it mean for investors? So one of those pillars that André has pointed out is the regulation. So I will focus on that pillar right now. So in order to understand how the regulation was carried out in Brazil, first, we need to understand how Brazil is organized in terms of the water and sanitation sector. And it's very important to know that the jurisdiction on water provision is at the municipal level. So there are the municipalities who define who will provide the service and who will regulate. So we have more than 5,000 municipalities in Brazil. And when it comes to regulation, the municipality can decide whether it will have a municipal or a set or a consortium of municipalities or a state regulatory agency to regulate its services. So it's up to the municipality to decide who is going to regulate its water and sanitation services. The result, we have in Brazil right now something like 70 regulators in Brazil that regulate the water and sanitation sector. So what's the consequence of having so many regulators in a country when it comes to the water sector? The thing is, we have regulators with different institutional capacity. Some have high capacity, they are very trained, they have all the governance necessary to perform a good regulation. But on the other hand, we have some regulators that are at the municipal levels, that they don't have sufficient people, they don't have the training necessary to perform regulations. So it's the situation has this kind of imbalance between regulators in Brazil. There are also some cases where you have, for example, companies, state water companies that are regulated by, may say, 3 or 4 regulators at the same state. In the state of Santa Catarina or Rio Grande do Sul, it's the case. And as long as the regulators have the same procedures or the same rules, that wouldn't be a problem. But you cannot be sure that during the now and the future, they will have and they will adopt the same rules, the same regulations. So the consequence is a regulatory risk for investors or for the private capital. So then we have this new law. How the law has changed this situation? What's the law is bringing to the society in order to improve this situation? So the first thing the law said was to bring ANA, the National Water and Sanitation Agency, to the game. ANA has already 20 years of experience. We were created as a water resources management agency, and now we received these new duties of being a kind of, have a duty of a kind of regulatory oversight of the water and sanitation sector in Brazil. So we will be responsible for issuing regulations that aim to standardize the regulation in Brazil. So as I said before, we have something like 70 regulators that can or may have different approach to regulation. So our duty, our new role is to try to standardize those regulations. And we will do that by issuing regulations that are more likely, I would say, for those who know the European Union, directives, because they need that they need to be transposed into local regulations by the regulatory agency. So ANA will write down directives, and these directives need to be transposed into regulations at local level. But our regulations will, in some way, to standardize how regulation will be done in Brazil. And then but what are the topics or the subjects that ANA will regulate? Topics such as contracts, so have standard contracts, quality and efficiency of the services. So what's the minimum or ideal requirements for a good service provision? So directives for increasing coverage, among others. So these are just a group, and then each of those topics we can divide or split into many regulations for each of the components of the water and sanitation sector in Brazil, as stated by André before: water, sewage, urban waste, and storm drainage. So all these 4 components will be addressed by ANA's directives. One important thing is that ANA will not regulate the water utilities itself, which means that the regulation is still being played at local level. The regulators that already exist, they will continue to regulate their water utilities. ANA will have this role of oversight regulation, writing down directives, but the regulation is still at local level. So one question that may arise is, if these regulations, these directives, they need to be transposed into local regulations, what's the guarantee that the regulators at local level will adopt the ANA's regulations? So we talk, in this case, we have 2 strategies, I would say. One is the soft power, and the second one is the hard power, let's say. So the soft power is try to bring everyone to the table during the discussion of each of those regulations. So if everyone is on the table, everyone can participate and can provide contributions, they will own the regulation and they will for sure adopt. But if that doesn't work, the law has another strategy, which is the spending powers of the federal government. So the new law says that the government will only transfer federal funds for municipalities or utilities that are affiliated to regulators who adopt the directives written down by ANA. So, as I said, 2 strategies, the soft and the hard power, let's say. So, and besides that, ANA will also be able to provide mediation and arbitrage of conflicts involving water utilities, municipalities, and regulators. So when you have those kind of conflicts, they can bring to ANA, and ANA can try to mediate or arbitrate those conflicts. So that's the new role. That's what's different from what we had before. Now we have someone that can try to standardize all the regulation in the country. So what does that mean for investors? That's, I think, one of the questions. So the first thing is to reduce regulatory risks. As long as you know how the regulation will be performed in the whole country, we know the risks that we are going to face. Another aspect is ANA is here in Brasilia. It's away from local politics. So that's another good thing, because with our regulatory oversight role, we can be very far from the discussion, from the local discussion, and when a conflict comes to ANA that we have to mediate and arbitrate, we won't be involved in those local politics issues. And so when ANA writes down directives that are followed by local regulators, the regulatory cost will be reduced. And another point is that we can know what will be presented by ANA, what will be discussed in advance. Just for giving you an example, we have prepared a regulatory agenda for the next 2 years. So it's already on the internet, so everyone can see which are the regulations that ANA is going to discuss with the society for the next 2 years. So it's already there, transparency, so you can know how ANA will do that and when ANA will do that, we'll discuss. So wrapping up my speech here, I would say that we had a situation before with fragmentation of the regulation of the water sector. What ANA brings is to standardize this regulation, aiming to reduce the regulatory risk, and then give the conditions to bring the investors to the country. So thank you everyone for this opportunity to speak here. And back to you, Carlos. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Carlos Mota, from the Deputy Superintendent from the National Water Agency. And I think it's very important and very clear, the messages. First of all, that ANA was called by the new legislation to standardize the work and the framework from the local government agencies and from regional regulators. So we are reducing the trouble for investors that will be or have been regulated by different agents as they spread their wings through the large Brazilian territory. I think that a second point that you've called attention is that these new guidelines that ANA is called to establish will create a market-friendly environment away from the daily problems of local politics and regional politics. So from Brasilia to the rest of the country. And finally, I think that it's very important that you called for a timetable and the processes that comes with the work of ANA, both in terms of the way you deal with the regulators, so a set of carrots and incentives for compliance, and also the sticks, the fact that the federal government will only transfer money for local governments if they comply with the directives that ANA has set. I think it has worked in other areas of public policy, and it's definitely an important stick, an important hand power, as you said, so that it can work in framing these regulators towards the same set of criteria and monitoring actions. I would like to invite for our conversation Daniel Keller, the coordinator of the Water and Sewage Committee from ABDIB, the the Brazilian Association for the Development of Infrastructure. Daniel, thank you very much for being here.
Hello, thank you very much. In the first place, I would like to thank the Brazilian federal government, also Apex. I would like to highlight the brilliant presentations of André Galvão and of Carlos Mota. I agree completely with them and the main pillars that they talked about. So I am a private sector representative. ABDIB is an association, I would say, one of the most important associations of the private sector regarding infrastructure. I will talk about what, in my opinion, are the main achievements or factors regarding the new legal framework, new sanitation framework of Brazil. So, first of all, in my opinion, the previous framework had an important role. It was responsible for increasing the Brazilian water provision for a large percentage of the population. But as Andrea talked before, we still have a lot of people without access to treated water and without access to sewage collection services in Brazil. So this previous model has to be changed. And in my opinion, this new legal framework will do that. And not only Brazil, but also foreign investors and Brazilian investors have a very good, very interesting opportunity now in the water and sewage sector, in the sanitation sector as a whole. So going to talking about the new legal framework in a more specific way, André and Carlos talked about some points that I'm going to highlight, but my vision is going to be a little more a private sector approach. So the goals for universalization that are predicted in the new law is a very important thing, because previously many contracts, especially the ones signed with these state-owned utilities, didn't have clear goals. So these companies, they weren't, many times they just didn't achieve these goals, and universalization didn't come. With the new law, these goals are clear, and the date is 2033. Maybe it will be postponed a little bit, but it's very good to have a clear date for universalization of water and sewage services in Brazil. Also, there are other goals that the new contracts that will be signed have to detail. Reduction of losses. Brazilian state-owned companies currently they work with very large losses. This is a very important problem, very big problem for them, and now we have goals to reduce these losses. Also, the new law talks about efficiency and rational use of water, which is also very important. Another subject that was also mentioned before is the bidding processes. So with the new law, all the new contracts that will be signed have to be a part of a bidding process. And we'll probably have competition between public and private companies. By the end of September, we'll have this first test, which will be very interesting. It's a very good project. So the private sector is really looking at this, the result of this bidding process, to see how the sector goes. Other very important subjects that are predicted in the new law is that it's possible for the state-owned utilities to keep on what we call their contract programs that are in effect. So it's possible for them to maintain these contracts, but they have to achieve minimum economic and financial indicators. So we don't want to wait until 2033 to understand that they won't achieve the investments, that they won't achieve universalization goals. We can look at that with this, using these economic and financial indicators, so that we can understand, in the next 2 or 3 years, that they won't be able to achieve the goals, and we'll try to, Brazilian federal government, the state governments, and the state-owned companies can try to change the projects. They can try to, think about PPPs or concessions structured by the state government, structured by the state-owned companies, in order to increase investments, in order to bring these private investments to the sector. Okay, this is also very important. The new law also addresses the regionalized provision of services, which is very important because in the water and sewage sector, in sanitation, we have clear scale gains. Since the granting authority is the municipality, it's very important that we think about aggregating and regionalizing the service in order to be able to have scale gains, and also to include the less profitable municipalities in these programs. They can't be left alone since they are not profitable for the private sector. That would, the public sector will have to spend money and invest on them, so we have to include them in these projects. And I think that, at least in my opinion, the new law addresses that matter. Another important factor is that BNDES, which is, and Caixa Econômica Federal, which are the main Brazilian development banks, they are working hard on developing new projects on the sector. I heard from BNDES's president that water and sewage sector is one of the main sectors they are studying and trying to develop. So that's also a very important news. So in my opinion, investments should increase in the next few years, in the next decade in the sanitation sector, which is very important. Private sector engagement also should increase with new PPPs and concession projects. As I said before, by the end of September we will have this first test, but in the next months we will also have very important tests coming, because BNDES, as I said before, and Caixa are already developing very interesting projects for the sector. And we have a very, we have now a clear way for universalization in 2033. So I would like to also highlight the importance of these regulatory subjects, as mentioned before by Carlos Mota. Previously in Brazil, we had many regulatory agencies for water and sewage. That created a lot of uncertainty regarding regulation, and I think everybody knows, or I can also talk about that if I'm asked, the importance of regulation for concession contracts. To have ANA as regulatory reference for all the regulatory agencies in Brazil is very important. So these are the main points that I would like to highlight. The private sector is very confident now with this new law, and I think also for foreign investors is a very good, very interesting opportunity to invest in water and sanitation, water and sewage as a sanitation as a whole in Brazil. Thank you very much, Carlos.
Thank you, Daniel Keller, from the Brazilian Association of Infrastructure and Basic Industries, ABDIB. And this is a private sector voice, I'd like to stress. And it's very pleasing to hear from a representative of the private sector that confirms everything that was said before by government officials, André Galvão Silveira from the ministry and Carlos Mota from the federal regulator. And if I could summarize Daniel's message, it was that we have now clearer goals and a time frame for completion, which helps the private sector to plan for investment. He's confident on the bidding process that was established by the new law, and the economic and financial indicators that was set, as well as the good expectations from the ANA's new role to standardization of regulation in order to improve the clear scale opportunities that are there for the private sector to reap. Finally, ABDIB is also confident by the signs of the involvement of BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, and Caixa Econômica Federal, a public bank that has been involved for decades in infrastructure projects. So if I could summarize, from the private and public sector views that were expressed here, I would say that the Brazilian sewage and sanitation sectors are open for business. It is a call for private investors to come in, enjoy the push for universalization of the infrastructure in these sectors that are so necessary, in a big push that is aimed in a few years to clear a gap of $150 billion. Thank you very much. Thank you for Apex for the opportunity to lead this panel. And I give back the floor to, thank you for all the panelists and for the audience. And I'd like to bring back the General Roberto Scotto, who heads Apex's investment department.
I'd like to thank you very much and congratulate the three panelists for your very good presentations, and Carlos Pio for your excellent moderation, bringing very good insights and comments about the sanitation sector. Now, I will give you a brief overview of what Apex-Brasil can do to help you from the moment you start considering investing in Brazil through the beginning of operations in our country and all the way to the development of your company's presence in Brazil. But before that, I'd like to answer the most important question for every investor. Why invest in Brazil? First of all, because it's a continental country of 8,500 square kilometers that is very rich in natural resources. It has fertile soil and abundant water for agribusiness, many natural and energy resources, besides the largest biodiversity of the planet. Brazil has a big and diversified industrial park. The industry represents 20.9% of GDP, 70% of exports of assets and services, and 72% of private investments in research and development. Despite the pandemic, for the fourth consecutive month since May, Brazil's Industrial Confidence Index showed an upward trend. Expectations over the next 6 months have improved. Besides being a large consumer market with 210 million inhabitants, Brazil is also a platform for exports to other markets. The financial sector is highly sophisticated and allows strong access to debt instruments as well as domestic and foreign markets. The national legislation does not discriminate against foreign investments. Besides that, the federal government is fully committed to making the regulatory environment even more business-friendly. Brazil has the largest infrastructure portfolio in the world, with hundreds of projects in which you can invest with legal certainty, transparency, and predictability. There are ample openings for private investment in infrastructure since the government has planned more auctions to be held in 2020. It's important to note that Brazil was the 6th global FDI destination in 2019. Moreover, according to the US consultancy firm A.T. Kearney, Brazil is among the 25 most reliable countries for foreign direct investment. Apex also supports foreign investment funds seeking opportunities for venture capital and private equity allocation in Brazil, facilitating contact with Brazilian funds, companies, and startups. Apex supports investors in the identification of suitable locations, besides providing general information on potential costs, business environment, and talent pool availability. Using an extensive network, Apex-Brasil also acts as liaison between foreign investors and regulatory and local authorities. We arrange one-on-one meetings between investors and public and private local stakeholders, besides organizing investments roundtables. Apex organizes business seminars like the ones which happened in China in 2019, in India, and in the United States this year. Since the very beginning of this pandemic, Apex has a hot site for supporting Brazilian companies and foreign investors, particularly providing updated and qualified information regarding all the measures introduced by the federal government to overcome the economic crisis. You will find more information on the Invest in Brazil LinkedIn profile and also on our new investment portal, investinbrazil.com.br. You can download the investment guide to Brazil with relevant and detailed information which will facilitate doing business in Brazil. To conclude, I'd like to note that the Brazilian infrastructure sector has been growing during this global economic downturn, and investing in infrastructure is profitable despite the crisis. I'd also like to highlight that foreign investors have showed confidence in Brazil's economy in the long term because we are a resilient country which overcame other crises and will succeed again. Finally, let me state that Apex-Brasil stands ready to assist foreign companies willing to invest in Brazil, a country of millions of people and opportunities. If you want more information about our services on scheduled bilateral meetings, please contact us at ibi@apexbrasil.com.br. The investment team will be pleased to help you. Now, as a way to show the private participation in the sanitation sector, I invite Daniel Risica, co-chair of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce, that will moderate this panel, which will have the participation of the CFO of BRK Ambiental, Sérgio Garrido de Barros, and the manager of investor relations at Aegea Adriana Albanese. Daniel, are you here with us? Daniel, the panel is yours. Welcome.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. I just want to thank Apex-Brasil and the Brazilian government for the invite today. It's a pleasure to be here representing both the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce as well as KPMG. And I want to say welcome to our panelists here, Adriana and Sergio. Welcome to both of you, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you here today. Why don't we start off? I know it's maybe on my script to give the company backgrounds, and I do actually know quite a little about BRK and Untitled. But I was wondering if maybe Adriana, you could give us a little bit of a background of AGEA, and then Sergio, you could give background on BRK afterwards.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the invitation on behalf of AGEA. It's a pleasure to be here with Sergio, Daniel, and all of the panelists. I had a problem here. Someone left a cell phone. But just to give you a brief introduction of AGEA, AGEA is a private company that operates concessions in Brazil. We have now concessions in 57 municipalities in 12 states of the country. The company started to invest in the sector in 2005 with a concession called Guariroba, Águas Guariroba, in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul, and then we grew up to the 57 concessions that we have nowadays. The company has 1.3 billion in EBITDA in the last 12 months and serves about 2.8 million clients, which makes us, in terms of clients served, the largest private company in Brazil.
Great. Thank you for that. Sergio, maybe you could give us a bit of background as well, and then we can move into some questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Daniel. Hi, Adriana. Very nice to meet you. Thank you all. Just a brief presentation on BRK. BRK is a company controlled by Brookfield in Brazil. We operate in 12 states in the country, over 100 municipalities, serving approximately 15 million people in water and wastewater services through 22 SPEs, among concession, PPPs, and assets location. We are the only private company to operate one full state, the state of Tocantins, in the north region of Brazil, with 47 municipalities, including Palmas, the capital of the state, which is going to be the case that I'm going to go into further details in some minutes. We also operate the largest PPP in the country, a sewage operation, serving 4 million people in the metropolitan region of Recife, the capital of the state of Pernambuco, in the northeast region of Brazil, including 15 municipalities. It's a pleasure once again to be with you. I'll give you the word back to Daniel.
Great, thanks, Sergio. It's an interesting history, and I know quite a bit about it myself, actually, of the company. So it's nice to hear from you. Well, why don't I start with a quick question or two for Adriana here. Adriana, maybe you could give us a bit of background about how the investments have gone for your company in the private sector in water sanitation.
Okay, so as I mentioned, AGEA started to invest in the sector in 2005. We bought a company that was previously operated by a private player, Águas de Barcelona. So we started to operate the city of Campo Grande, which has about 900,000 inhabitants in that year. And then in 2006, we bought another asset, another company, which is Prolagos. in the state of Rio de Janeiro, região dos Lagos, and then we started to operate Prolagos. So up to 2012, Aegea had only these 2 assets and was serving 6 municipalities in Brazil, 1 in the state of Mato Grosso, and these 5 concessions in the state of Rio de Janeiro. Then in 2012, IFC joined our capital, our shareholding base. And in 2013, GIC joined our shareholding base. So with these 2 shareholders together with Equipave is our controlling shareholder. It's a Brazilian infrastructure group that has the control of Aegea. So with the capital injection from these 2 international shareholders, the company had the possibility to grow. We acquired 26 assets since then and 21 assets. So we created a platform to grow in this sector here in Brazil while we implemented the turnaround process in the assets of Guariroba and Prolagos. So our business is basically to operate water and sewage assets and to implement the expansion of networks of mainly here in Brazil, mainly sewage networks. So when we bought Guariroba, the sewage coverage was 27%, now is 80%. Prolagos is almost the same relation, so we expanded the sewage coverage. We implemented a lot of efficiency measures and synergies. We also grow through the consolidation of new concessions, always implementing synergies, efficiency, and expanding coverage. So this is our business nowadays. Guariroba has an EBITDA margin of 70%. Prolagos as well, but we also have in our portfolio recent assets that were acquired in the last years that has a lower coverage, a lower sewage coverage. For example, Manaus has 18% of sewage coverage and a margin EBITDA of 50%. Manaus is the largest water and sewage private concession in Brazil, is the capital of the state of Amazon. So what our business is to implement this turnaround process in all of these assets that we have in our portfolio.
Great. It's a really interesting history. And I think, maybe looking forward now, could we get your views on how you see the impact of the new regulations in the marketplace and how your company is planning to work within it? And the opportunities that you see?
Yeah. So, we operate water and sewage assets in Brazil, and we have dealt well with the previous regulation. We grew and we expanded our platform considering that model. Of course, that we have faced some challenges in this period. We interact with 27 regulatory agencies. So, and each contract has its standards, its milestones, and its ways to readjust tariff. For example, in each contract we have an each index to readjust tariff annually. So we have faced the challenges of having this regulatory environment, but in this regulatory environment, we could grow and we could expand our business. What we are seeing now is a better environment. We are very optimistic about the creation of ANA, which is good for the sector to have another player, as Carlos mentioned, as ANA acting as an arbitrator, as a third party in process that have conflicts with some municipalities eventually. So this is very good. But the most important thing of the new law, the new regulatory framework, is that every contract will have to include milestones, and companies will have to prove that they are capable to comply with those milestones. So we think that the problem for the sector in the past was always the origination of new business, and the future, considering this obligation of reaching milestones, could be with more projects coming to the market. So this will give a better environment for private players, for sure, to grow in Brazil.
Yeah, and I think as we heard a little bit earlier in the presentation today, I'm sure both of you agree, certainty in regulation for international investors is, in my view, criteria number one. So it's great to hear that that's the way things are moving forward. Sergio, maybe I could move over to you now. I mean, we heard a little bit earlier that the level of investment, necessary in Brazil is below, I think, what's needed to obtain universal access to water and sanitation treatment in Brazil. Maybe you can speak a little bit about BRK's views on this and what your company's doing to try and solve the problem, and as well as grow your business as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Daniel. Well, just to give you some numbers, in 2019, 60% of the 132 billion reais invested in infrastructure in Brazil were concentrated basically in two sectors, which are already universalized: energy and telecom. On the other hand, sanitation never represented more than 10%, way less than that during these periods. And according to recent studies, around 700 billion reais investments will be necessary to achieve universalization in the sanitation segment in Brazil by 2033. That means about 50 billion reais per year that will be required to universalize these services by this year, 2033, which is the goal of the National Plan of Basic Sanitation in Brazil, 4 times more than what has been executed over the last years. So this universalization goal, established back in 2013, was now reinforced by the legal framework recently approved by the Brazilian government. 95% of water and sewage services are currently provided by state or municipal entities which cannot afford to make the required investments. However, the private sector, although responding for just 5 to 6% of the market, represents 21% of the executed investments in the last years. So, in other words, the solution for sanitation in Brazil requires greater participation of the private sector, which in turn needs, as you have mentioned, legal certainty, stable regulations. But the solution also requires good projects to attract the private players to participate in the bidding processes. So since BRK change of control to Brookfield in 2017, we were in the past controlled by the Odebrecht Group. Only one relevant project came to the market, which was Corsan in late 2019. So I do believe that the new framework brings structural changes to the sector that would allow the increase of the participation of the private sector in the segment, increasing as a consequence the level of investments to make sure that we could achieve the goals that were established by the federal government.
Perfect. And you may have already touched on my last question there right at the end, but I wanted to ask you, how do you see the opening of the market as a result of this new regulation and advancing it forward? Okay. I agree with you, by the way. Good projects are necessary. So yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, sure. I think that the new framework makes possible to the private sector to increase its stake to the extent that more projects will come to the market, as I mentioned, more good projects will come to the market, more well-structured projects. BNDES is playing a very important role in that. Complementing that, existing formal contracts between municipalities and the state-owned companies must be adapted to accommodate the universalization goals for 2033. Now, for these contracts to be adapted with no need for biddings, the state-owned companies must prove their economic and financial capacity to make the required investments to universalize. This is one very good and strength point of the new regulatory framework. The majority of these companies, and they are more than 20, will not have this capacity. We'll have some difficulties to prove this capacity. In addition to that, we also have currently fragile contracts between the municipalities and the state-owned companies, whereby the state-owned company must provide services without a formal contract signed with the municipality. This will cease with the regulatory framework, and this process must also necessarily be offered for public bidding. So I do believe that this important changes prescribed by the new regulatory framework will help us to address this scenario.
Great. Well, thank you both for your insights today. It's a pleasure to speak to both of you. We sort of just scratched the surface, but hopefully we'll get to do more of these in the future. So thank you very much. Vou passar a palavra para Apex agora.
Thank you very much, Daniel, Sergio, and Adriana, for your excellent presentations and comments regarding the sanitation sector.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation.
To address structuring strategies for sanitation projects and the impacts of the new legal framework, I now invite the Deputy Special Secretary of PPI, Bruno Westing. Bruno, are you here with us?
Hello, everyone. Yeah.
The floor is yours,
Thank
Bruno.
you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say that it's a pleasure and an honor to present here on behalf of the PPI the portfolio of projects under structuring and which expands more and more. So thank you very much, General Scotto, on behalf of Apex, for the invitation and opportunity. I promise not to go too long, certainly of the interest of investors in have more details of my colleagues at Caixa and BNDES. So I'll show here a quick presentation. Several initiatives have been launched over time which aim to improve basic sanitation service in Brazil. The challenges in providing access to basic sanitation for the entire population are well known. Currently, a population equivalent to that of Canada does not have access to clean water in Brazil. More than 100 million Brazilians do not have access to sewage collection and treatment. We have made important progress in this sector. However, for the sake of truth, realize that the model put based on public investment has been exhausted. We can see less progress, even a stagnation in the last decade. Thus, we had to promote a change in the guideline and strategy in order to achieve universalization by 2033. Required investments of around $140 billion. My colleagues of BNDES and Caixa are preparing bankable projects for the adequate provision of service to Brazilians. You had the opportunity to see the presentation of them. We rely on the private initiative to bring, in addition to capital, the efficiency and quality required to meet the population's rights to basic sanitation. This is the purpose of the law that established the new legal framework for sanitation. A legal framework that sought to act on the weaknesses of the law then in force, with improvements in the regulatory framework, in the prohibition of program contracts, bringing more competition for the service, for the providing of the service, and in the initiative to provide the service in a regionalized manner, bringing more efficiency, more scale for the good projects. In accordance with this new regulatory framework that the projects for the two main support vehicles of the federal government were already being prepared. My colleagues now again will present more details of these 18 projects that are already in the portfolio and amount to 60 billion in investments to be contracted over the next years. And as I said before, this portfolio is increasing. It's spread all around our country and is increasing. What I would like to emphasize is the complementary action of these two institutions operating in order to tackle the different challenges to provide good projects here in Brazil. On one hand, we have BNDES with a strategy, let's say top-down, where concessions are made through state governments. And they have a greater focus on the combination of water and sewage concessions with water and sewage together. Also, they are prepared to support privatization alternative for the state companies that we know that with the new framework, some of them will not have the capacity to address the investment required. And on the other hand, we have Caixa Econômica, user resources from FAP, a fund dedicated to structuring projects in which federal government has quotas, with projects oriented towards regionalized provision through consortium, but where the municipality is the protagonist, not the state governments. So, as you can see, they are complementary vehicles to address the structuring projects that will bring investments for the purpose of universalizing the basic sanitation. The work of Caixa is also more focused on filling the gap in the sewage. As I see, where in a certain way, the water supply in the short term at least is already addressed by the municipality itself. This mitigates local conflicts and allows us to move forward with providing the service that is needed. Without further ado, I would like to thank you again and allow my colleagues to assist you with the details of these projects, of these 18 projects and the plans to increase our portfolio that I am sure is in everyone's interest. We have a lot of qualified investors on the audience, and they are anxious to get the details of this huge and very good opportunity to come to Brazil in a wave of investment that will transform the way that we operate the basic sanitation, the service provided of basic sanitation here in Brazil. So, without further ado, thank you, General Scodo. Thank you very much for the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno, for providing our audience with all this valuable information. Going ahead to address concessions via municipalities or consortiums and the progress of these projects and their main opportunities, I invite the National Manager of Caixa Econômica, André Araújo. André, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation. For Caixa Econômica, it's an honor being here to talk about a little bit about our PPP program, our federal program, sustained by the federal government and the Secretary of Partnerships and Investment Program. So I'll talk about a little bit about FEP Caixa. FEP Caixa, it's a fund. In reality, it's a program based on a fund where we have a third party that it's Caixa Econômica, public enterprise, designed to advise and help the municipalities crew to team to do the projects, the studies, to develop the studies. So it has some main characteristics. Let me start the presentation here. Okay, so we have here. So the fund, it's funded by federal resources. We have some prioritized sectors: urban mobility, sewage, water, and solid waste. And Caixa Econômica, it's responsible for the hiring of the consultants. So we also develop a technical, act like a technical advisor to the municipalities. So along all the way of the development of the projects, we assist the municipalities how we are addressing the studies, what is the best study for that region, and so on. The FEPCA, the fund, it's a revolving fund. So at the end of the process of studies, the fund has his expenditures reimbursed by the winner of the bid. We also have a project method to select the projects. We have federal resource, so we have to give isonomy for all the municipalities to access the fund. And we make a public selection by calling, public call, and also develop some pilots to develop new projects. We also consider partnerships with multilateral development banks. We have here the French agency, IDB, IFC, UN Ops. So a lot of partners to develop our projects. Okay, moving on. We have here our current pipeline. Now, actually, we have approximately 30 projects developing right now. This will assist 11 million people. So we have approximately 5% of the population of Brazil in this first tranche of developing the projects. We did the first 3 tenders in the B3 in São Paulo, very successfully, very competitive. We had more than 15. We had 15 bidders at the auctions. It was very, very attractive. Our projects, they are not so big. Our ticket, it's nearby $50 to $80 million reais. It depends on the sectors that we are acting. I'm talking more here about public lighting, but in sanitation, we expect the capex to be a little bit more, maybe 200 million our ticket medium. And this first round, we accessed 44 municipalities. That's because some of our projects are done in consortia. It's a model that we need to develop. We have in Brazil 5,500 municipalities, and 5,000 of them are have less than 50,000 people. And that's, we think it's nearby the limit to do public-private PPPs and concessions. So we have to manage how to associate them in consortia. Moving on, we have a projected pipeline for next year. Nearby about 100 projects. We are expecting to have nearby 100 projects, 135 to be more precise. Also going on in another kind of sectors like the social sector. the prison, doing juvenile correction facilities, schools, hospitals, so another kind of projects. We expect next year to reach nearby 50 million people in Brazil. So we have an ongoing process of developing these studies. Our main objective is to make sustainable projects, where we have a ticket a little bit smaller, but at the same time we share less risk. So our expectation is to attract new investors, new entries in the infrastructure sector here in Brazil. So we as a bank, Caixa Econômica also finances these projects, and we have a great expertise in doing so. And so our modeling, our structuring of the contracts and the projects are all based on project finance and bankability, and for project finance modality of finance. So we pay attention a lot in the offtake agreement to have characteristics that later the banks will look and have a little bit more of bankability for these projects. So we pay a lot of attention to the payment mechanism, a great interest in the revenues. We look very detailed for this. We also do a very intense analysis in the cash available for debt service to reach a minimum of 1.3 debt service cover ratio. It's in a policy of our bank. As I said, the offtake agreements are designed to be a financeable project. Also, a very close look to the covenants, all the covenants, and also the guarantee mechanism. We as Caixa Econômica, we also do a lot of escrow accounts for these projects. We think it's one of the most important things to guarantee that the cash will flow in the right hands, the right way. A good look also to the insurance documents, and we are implementing arbitrage and dispute boards to go faster in eventually some kind of discussion. So mainly this is what I had to present here today, and say that Caixa Econômica, it's only starting its process of developing projects. We expect for 2021 more than 100, but we have plans to go far beyond these numbers. As I said, we have more than 5,000 municipalities that we have to reach, and Caixa Econômica, it's a big enterprise. We have 80,000 employees, representation in all the municipalities of Brazil. So we think that as a partner of federal government of Brazil, and alongside the other banks, development banks, we can really change the way infrastructures have been done here in Brazil the last years. Thank you for the invitation again.
Thank you very much, André, for your participation and for explaining to our audience the role of Caixa Econômica Federal in supporting the municipalities. We saw that 135 projects will be available next year, so many opportunities for investments in sanitation. Thank you, André. To explain the development bank sanitation projects and its concessions in different states of Brazil, I invite the BNDES Infrastructure Concession and PPP's Director, Fábio Abrão. Fábio, welcome.
Good morning. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure is mine. It's quite important to start this conversation, explain a little bit how is we understand is the role of BNDES in terms of infrastructure development. And one of our goals since we started to redesign it more than 1 year ago was to improve the quality of the projects that the governments in general, which means state governments and also federal governments, bring to the market. Another goal is to increase the scale, because if you want to open the infrastructure market and to improve the competition, it's important to that those international investors, strategic ones, financial ones, they have as many opportunities it's needed to in order to develop teams dedicated to the country, develop some knowledge base. So another goal is to have scale, which means a long-term portfolio in some strategic sectors. Another one is to have the concept of one-stop shop, which means that we're starting the origination of those projects with the local governments, state governments, and federal. And let's say the major goal in these aspects to guarantee that the gap between the public policies and feasibility in terms of investment attraction, they're going to match. And that also is important for the long-term stability of the project. So in terms of sanitation specifically, our approach is much more oriented to state-wise. Our portfolio today sums up something a little bit more than $10 billion of capex specific for sanitation. At the 3rd of this month, we're going to see the first bid of a sanitation project in this new modeling, this new role of BNDES, which is Casal, the company that serves the sanitation, provides the sanitation services to Maceió, the capital, or one of the big capitals of the northeast of Brazil. We're very optimistic in this bid. We see that there are lots of international investors, strategic ones, financial ones, but also the local companies that are seen as an opportunity to increase the base of their services. After that, we're going to have Rio de Janeiro, SEDAI. SEDAI is today the biggest concession infrastructure projects in Brazil. SEDAI, we're gonna do the public. We just finished the public hearing. The next step is to organize the bid. Probably it's gonna happen by the very beginning of the next year. We're gonna be technically prepared to do that by the end of the year. But in terms of providing the right time to especially the international investor to analyze that deeply, we're gonna increase this our time sheet in 2 months. And probably we are planning to have this bid by February of 2021. And after that, we have other significant projects such as the state of Acre and Amapá, both in the Amazon region. Rio Grande do Sul have 2 major projects. One in Porto Alegre, the capital. Another one that comprising some very important countryside municipalities, and also Ceará. We also have deep conversations with other states. So we believe that at least 3 or 4 more states are going to join us in this portfolio. One of them that we are in a very advanced conversations is the state of Paraíba. Another one is Rondônia. So we built this portfolio. It's as we say, it's a long-term portfolio that has enough opportunities to local investors, but also to international ones. The design of those projects. We included specifically the risk in terms of the demand and the exercise of matching the expectation of the local government, the state government, and the expectation of the investors. We understand that for those companies that are specialized in network infrastructure, they're going to see some relevant upsides, those projects. So we believe that we're going to see healthy competition, and we're going to see new players in the country for the next years. So a great diversification of our sanitation service providers. So again, we are very optimistic. The regulatory framework is, we just saw a major improvement on that due to the bill. BNDES has a very active role discussing not just with the federal government itself, but also with the Congress. We have a division dedicated to do this integration between our technical analysis and the Congress itself, and that's working pretty well. Again, we've been very active in the sanitation bill. Of course, we are participating in others, such as the discussion concerning the debentures, also the concessions itself. So again, we're very optimistic. We are seeing a high level of interest from strategic investors that are not operating in Latin America, others that are in Latin America, not in Brazil, and lots of financial investors willing to join this environment.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Really, we see that there are very good opportunities at the state level, and we recognize the role of the development bank in supporting the states, and particularly in structuring the good projects they have. We had great explanation from our speakers, and we can really see that beyond an attractive business environment, the potential of Brazilian projects is definitely above average. Before the end of this event, I'd like to stress again that Apex-Brasil, in partnership with several institutions, plan a series of initiatives with the focus of attracting foreign investments for the infrastructure sector. The next event will be on October 6th, and we will present to Turkish investors the regulatory and legislative transformation that the Brazilian government has made in order to make the business environment increasingly more attractive. In addition to the main opportunities of the sector, more information can be obtained at the next events part of our sanitation event hot site and from the Apex-Brasil website, apexbrasil.com.br, or on the LinkedIn profile, Invest in Brazil, and other social medias of Apex. Registrations for this event are already opened. I'd like to thank all of you who watched us today. Invest in Brazil, invest with trust and safety, invest with Apex-Brasil. And now, it's an honor to invite Ms. Jennifer May, Ambassador of Canada to Brazil, and Mr. Pedro Borio, Ambassador of Brazil to Canada, for their closing remarks.
Thank you very, very much. Merci BCC, Apex-Brasil et ABGB for the invitation to participate in this event. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and always a pleasure to be with you, Ambassador Borio. It's been an incredible event to participate in, incredible detail, and appreciate everybody's support for it. Gostaria de cumprimentar o ministro Rogério Marinho. Obrigada pela sua participação participação mais cedo e apoio ao fortalecimento dos vínculos entre o Brasil e Canadá, em assuntos prioritários para ambos países. Saneamento é um setor em que temos sinergias fortes e liderança de empresas canadenses no mercado, como a BRK Ambiental. C'est une excellente expérience d'apprentissage pour moi et je suis heureuse de participer à cet effort pour partager l'expertise, l'équipement et la technologie canadienne avec le marché brésilien de l'assainissement. Surtout en cette période de pandémie où l'assainissement est devenu plus que jamais un outil crucial pour lutter et contenir la propagation de la COVID-19. The ambitious goals for universalizing water and sanitation services in Brazil have created great needs for private sector involvement, innovative solutions, and clean technologies, and have exposed strong synergies for Canadian leading-edge, innovative, and diverse solutions. As today's speakers and success cases have demonstrated, Canada is in fact present at all levels of this sector, including with significant investment in large-scale projects. BRK Ambiental, the largest private water and sanitation company in Brazil, is owned by Brookfield, a Canadian company. BRK formed the largest PPP in Brazil to bring improved sanitation services to the Recife metropolitan region in the Northeast, an area of low water and sanitation coverage and high economic vulnerability. Iguá Saneamento, one of the newest private sanitation companies, has the Alberta Investment Management Corporation as a minority shareholder. It recently issued $157 million worth of sustainable bonds, both green and social, a first for Brazil's sanitation sector. This guarantees investment to improve water and sanitation infrastructure with positive environmental and social impacts. At the commercial level, Canadian sustainable solutions that have been successful in this sector include sludge dewatering equipment, automated control valves, pipeline sensors for leak detection using Internet of Things, and real-time sensor technology to monitor wastewater quality, among others. Avec le nouveau cadre juridique du secteur brésilien de l'assainissement, il y a de réelles opportunités pour les entreprises canadiennes d'investir dans les projets à grande échelle qui auront un impact significatif sur le développement du Brésil. Le gouvernement brésilien a clairement pris le temps et les efforts nécessaires pour s'assurer que ces projets sont bien structurés, axés sur l'obtention de résultats avec une concurrence, une efficacité et une qualité accrue. Canadian companies can help bring these results to the Brazilian sanitation sector, and in doing so, uphold and amplify our values of sustainability and inclusive growth, considering the rights of Indigenous populations and women. In closing, I would like to reinforce the invitation extended by our colleagues today to explore opportunities in the Brazilian market. Our team of trade commissioners are here to provide assistance and further information on the market. I wish you all great business success in Brazil. Je vous souhaite bonne affaire à Brésil. Merci et obrigada a tous.
Okay, we are closing, we are finishing our event now. I thank you very much again for all the participants of this event, and we wait you for the next event on October 6th. Thank you very much. Have a good day.